All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I would, really would encourage you that Camp Attitude folks are right outside these doors in the back. Would encourage you to go and to have some time with them if you're interested in hearing more about that. This morning, we're continuing on in a teaching series called The Visible Gospel. And what we're doing in this series is we're walking through the ancient New Testament letter of James and just sort of trying to see how its teaching and its wisdom can apply to our lives today. And as we talked about a little bit last week as we kicked this off, it's kind of a strange title for it. But I think it really does apply because when God does this invisible work on the inside of us, of saving us and transforming us, James believes that that should show up in visible ways. The things that we do, the things we say, the way that we interact with other people. So that's kind of what the book is all about. And what we're doing, we're kind of working through this, talking a little bit about who James is. James was the half-brother of Jesus. And he wrote this letter to try and encourage other Christians, even though they were experiencing difficulties and persecution and suffering, encouraging them to continue to follow the teachings of Jesus in their life and really trying to sort of call out God's best for their life. So each week in the series, we're just kind of digging into one chapter. Last week, we were in chapter 1, kind of got things started. This morning, we're skipping ahead a little bit to chapter 3, and then we'll go back to chapter 2 next week. So if you can, go ahead and turn with me in whatever format of Bible you brought to James chapter 3. If you didn't bring a Bible with you this morning, or maybe you're new to the faith, you're not quite sure how to find passages, that's okay. If you're new, we don't expect you to know how to find things. In fact, if you're a guest and visiting, we're just really glad that you're here. But if you need a Bible, there should be a red one in one of the seats around you. You can grab it and turn to the page number that's on the screen, and we'll get started in just a moment. The topic, though, today that we're getting into in chapter 3 is one that I recognize a lot of people do struggle with, because it's all about how we use our words and controlling our tongues. Now, personally, this has never been an issue for me. I just always seem to say the right thing, so I was really kind of at a loss when it came to getting ready for this morning. But then it dawned on me. I do know someone, I'm very close to someone who really does struggle with this. They're always kind of putting their foot in their mouth. So I thought, as a way to research for today's sermon, I could sit down and interview this person. And I actually did an interview a few years back with this person I'll share with you. Some of you guys don't know this, but I actually have a brother. He's my evil twin brother, Ike. And Ike really struggles with his words. So I just want to show you guys a brief video, an interview that I did with my evil twin brother, Ike, a while back.
Okay, so Ike, thanks for doing this with us today. I mean, now to get started, you and I are identical twins, but we're not the same people. We're very different. I mean, in your opinion, what are some of the differences between us? Well, sure. I mean, we're not the same people, and there are lots of differences. Really, the one that comes to mind, first of all, is that when we were growing up, I don't know how it worked out, but you always said the right thing. I mean, you never got in trouble for what you said, and I was always saying the wrong thing. I mean, it seems like I was always putting my foot in my mouth. I guess one other difference people might be interested in is that I've never had any luck with the ladies. And yet you, somehow, you managed to land Martha. I mean, have these people seen her? She is a hottie. Whoa, listen, okay? Get careful. That's my wife you're talking about there, all right? You just got to be careful about what you say. But now, you mentioned earlier that you were always saying the wrong things. I mean, can you give us an example of that? Well, sure. I mean, I've always had a little bit of a temper, I guess. Or whenever I get angry or frustrated, that tends to show up in what I say. I mean, I remember one time I'm driving down the highway, and this little innocent old lady kind of very innocently cuts me off. And for whatever reason, it just set me off. I mean, I was angry. And the next thing I know, I'm just screaming at her at the top of my lungs as I'm driving down the highway and I'm shaking my fist. And, there's nobody around to hear that. I'm just yelling. Or another example, we've got twin girls. And when they were little, they had colic. And, there were some times in the middle of the night when they would be up crying. And, it's not their fault. They're just babies. But I would get angry and I would get frustrated, and the next thing I know, I'm holding my precious daughter in my arms, and I'm just like, but it's just the anger coming out or the frustration coming out. That's funny because we have twin girls too, and for me, I don't know, I treasured every single moment of those late night colicky, crying, scream-filled sessions. I guess that's just a difference between me and you, huh? But No, it is crazy. I mean, now that we're both parents, it's amazing how your kids can really get under your skin and make you say some things you never expected to. Yeah, I mean, it's really true that kids can do that. And, now that our girls and our son, they're getting older, they're starting to talk and they're really listening to what we say. And that's really scary. I mean, this is like a couple of weeks ago, we're driving down the highway and one of my daughters needs her water bottle. So I'm passing her the water bottle and I drop it. And I'm like, oh, crap. Well, the next thing I know, there's this little chorus of voices from the back seat chirping in, oh, crap, 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 crap. And I'm just like, oh, no. It's scary to think about the impact that your words can have on other people. It really is scary to think about that sometimes, isn't it? You have any other stories or things you want to share with us? Well, sure. Another story that comes to mind. I remember when I was first dating my wife, I took her to meet some of my friends from college. And, I was kind of nervous because I wanted her to make a good impression on them and all that. And for me, like when I'm feeling nervous or when I'm insecure, I tend to respond by trying to be funny. And really by being like really sarcastic and making cutting remarks about people. Well, my wife, it turns out, is a missionary kid. She grew up outside the country. And, it's 5 minutes into dinner with my friends from college, and there we are, and we're starting to crack jokes about how weird missionary kids are. And, they're freaks, and you can spot them from 100 miles away. And, it worked, right? It was funny. It made me feel a little bit better. But, Martha wasn't laughing. My friends were laughing, and I was laughing, but she wasn't laughing. It just ended up hurting her. Yeah, it sounds like you really dropped the ball there. It's a good thing for me, I've never had any experiences like that.
Okay, so true confessions time. I don't actually have an evil twin brother named Mike. I know you're very surprised to hear that, but that was actually me using the magic of video. But no, I wanted to start out with that video because all those stories that Ike told, those are my stories, right? I've yelled at people in traffic. When our twins were little, there were some things that I said in the middle of the night that, I'm glad that babies don't remember what you say to them in the middle of the night. And, when it comes to this idea of being careful about what you say, I just have always really struggled with that. And my guess is that I am not alone in that, right? You got some fellow co-sufferers out there with me. In fact, it's interesting, in this chapter, James, in just a few verses into it, will actually go on and talk about how universal this problem is. He says, no one can tame the tongue, right? No one can do that. And then just a little bit after that, he goes on and describes, I think in a way he describes a situation how all of us, we've all got a little Ike and a little Mike inside of us. We do some good and some bad. Look at what he says here. He says, with the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who've been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. Right? We're all kind of a mixed bag when it comes to this topic. Which is why it's been an interesting process getting ready for this sermon. Whenever I go back to this text and look at these ideas, it's really helpful for me because I do continue to need to work on this. But it's also really kind of convicting and challenging to have to get back into this and realize that there's still some room to grow. So with that in mind, what I thought we'd do is we'll just kind of read through James chapter 1 and we'll kind of talk about some of the ideas as they pop up. James chapter 3. So starting in verse 1, this is what we see. It says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at faith in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they're steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Now, all throughout this chapter, James is going to be talking about the importance of words and the impact they have. And he's really got kind of two main points that he's trying to make when he talks about our words and how we use them. And the first one he's starting to drive at here. He's trying to point out to us that our words really can have a huge impact on the people around us. Right? He starts out saying, not many of you should presume to be teachers. You'll be held more accountable. And if you wonder, why does he do that? Why does he sort of single out teachers and preachers? It's because of this. It's because he's convinced that words have an impact, and teachers and preachers can get more words in the ears of more people. Therefore, there's more potential impact, so there's more responsibility that goes with that because of the power of that little word that we can say. And it's really a crazy idea, right? Our words are not big, they're just little things. But James uses a couple of really interesting images to talk about sort of the outsized impact that those words can have. They kind of punch above their weight in that sense. So he talks a little bit about horses, right? He says, the horse is this giant, powerful animal. And yet there's this tiny little metal bit. And when you put that thing in the horse's mouth, whoever's riding it can steer the horse wherever they want to go, right? Little thing, big impact. And then another example, he talks about ships. I mean, think about some of the giant transport ships that we see out at the coast. He says these ships are these enormous, huge things, but they've all got a rudder on it. And compared to the overall size of the ship, that rudder is not very big. But the pilot who controls that rudder ultimately controls where that enormous ship is going to go. So he says our words can have this incredible impact on other people. And then as you keep reading, you get to verse 5, James kind of goes on. He says, not only do our words have the ability to impact people, if we're not wise in how we use them, we can really have an incredible negative impact on people. So look what he says starting in verse 5. He says, likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire. It is a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil. It is full of deadly poison. So when James is talking about the power that our tongue have, how it can really inflict damage on people, he's just kind of standing in a long line. There's this tradition about words that goes all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, what we know as the Old Testament, that talks about this. So in the book of Proverbs, for example, it says this. It says, the tongue has the power of life and death. I mean, think about that. Life and death is all wrapped up in the power of the tongue, in the words that you say. That's why he says, hey, not many of you should presume to be teachers and preachers, because then you're up there, you're dealing in life and death with people, and there's an incredible responsibility that goes with that. And James highlights that because he doesn't want people who teach and preach to take that influence lightly. And I don't. But I think the important thing for us to think about today is that when James is talking about here isn't just about the act of teaching or the act of preaching. James is talking about the way that our words impact other people. And in that sense, we are all really well served to pay attention and listen, because all of us are in relationships with other people where our words matter, right? All of us are in relationships with other people where we can impact people in positive ways, like impact them speaking words of life, or we can impact them in negative ways, right? Speaking words that lead to death. So James is trying to drive at here, right? If we want to be visible gospel people, if we want to let the invisible work God does on the inside of us show up on the outside, we've got to be careful in how we use our words to influence others. So I think a question that is good for all of us to wrestle with today is just this. Where do you have impact on somebody else? Right? Because we all do. All of us are in relationships with other people where our words carry weight, where we can impact and influence other people. Those of you who are parents, right? Obviously, our words have an impact on our kids. I mean, you saw that in that video with Ike, right? They're listening whether we want them to be listening or not. Think about you in the workplace. Maybe you manage people, or think about your coworkers or the vendors that you interact with. How do your words impact them? How do they set the tone? Maybe you're here and you're like, I don't know, I'm just a high school student. I'm not a parent. I don't have a job. My words don't impact other people. Well, think about it. We've all got people in our lives. What about your classmates? What about the students younger than you that are kind of looking up to you, that you pass in the hallway and you make a comment to them? What about your parents, right? Because just like the parents' words impact kids' words sure do impact parents too in ways that kids don't always understand. See, I think it's really appropriate to go back to the first verse of this chapter and take out the word teacher and preacher. And I would just invite you to put in your own situation in life in there and realize that's applying to you. James could be saying, not many of you should presume to be parents, or presume to be employees, or presume to be friends, because you know that in that role your words carry power and you will be judged for how you use those words. And this idea of being responsible for our words, right? He's just sort of echoing what Jesus himself said. One point in his ministry on earth, Jesus said this. He said, I tell you, people will have to give account for every careless word that they have spoken. I cannot tell you how many times I have wished that that verse were not in the Bible. But there it is, right? Accountable for every careless word that they've spoken, right? We have to realize that whoever we are, there is great power in our words. So we need to use that accordingly. So that's kind of the first main point that James is driving at here. Our words can have an enormous impact on other people. And we need to keep that in mind as we use our words. But if you keep reading through the chapter, you realize that James has another very important point to make about the words we use and how that can impact the way we live. And I actually want to introduce this point by talking about my old truck, of all things. So when I was a poor seminary student, I got to drive this guy, a 1981 Ford F-150. Wow, I was a little tubbier back then, too, now that I think about it. Somebody after the first service, they were really they're like, so, have you made changes in your diet or exercise since you took that picture? I was like, yeah, I was fatter then. Thanks for pointing that out. But no, so I drove this 81 F-150, and it was one of these cars. Like, this car had so much personality, you had to give it a name. Have any of you ever done that, kind of named your car because it just had so much life and personality to it? Okay, so I named this truck El Guapo, which means the handsome one. And I named it that because this truck was such a beat-up piece of junk. Okay, it was rusted through. There was like a hole in the floorboard. You could see the road as you were driving by it. I mean, it was just always breaking down. This car had more problems. I don't even know where to begin to describe it. The air conditioning didn't work. If you were foolish enough to turn the heat on in the winter, like thick black smoke would sometimes just randomly pour out of the vents. The windows didn't seal very well, so I got frost on the inside of the windows in the winter. Reverse only worked about half of the time. Oh, and one time I had all these carburetor problems, so I took it into the shop, and they called me and they said, hey, I just need to let you know, it's kind of squirting gas everywhere. So I'm working on it, but law says I have to have another guy with a fire extinguisher right next to me as I do this job. So that was El Guapo. Lots of problems. But the worst thing about El Guapo is that it leaked. I mean, it leaked everything. Like behind the seat of it was like a used auto parts store in there. It had all these jars of stuff. It leaked oil. It leaked transmission fluid. It leaked steering fluid. It leaked it even leaked windshield wiper fluid, which is ironic because only one of the windshield wipers worked. But the thing is, it leaked so many different things, I didn't notice when it started leaking brake fluid. Yeah, I didn't notice that it was leaking brake fluid until one morning I was driving to work, and I'm just barreling down 91st Street in Tulsa, and I come up to a red light, and I put my foot on the brakes, and nothing happens. And there's an elementary school there, and I just sailed through the red light. And I still remember the look on the face of this lady who had to like slam on the brakes as I went by. Well, I mean, luckily it was early enough that there weren't students around, and I managed to kind of get the car off to the side of the road and figure out what was going on. But, normally when you back your car out in the morning and you realize that it's leaking something, that's a warning sign, right? There's something going on under the hood that needs to be addressed. Well, El Guapo leaked so many things, I missed the warning sign. I missed it when it started leaking brake fluid, and that could have had some really serious implications. Well, this is where this all comes back to James, believe it or not. I think James understands that our words are like warning signs. Right? When they come out, they tell us something about what is going on the inside of us, when there might be something broken under the hood that needs to be addressed. So take a look at how he talks about this starting in verse 9. He says, with the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who've been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Again, for James, the point that he's trying to make is that our words reveal our character. They tell us something about who we are and what's going on in our heart. Right? So if words that, sort of are anger or frustrating, that's a warning sign that there's something going on under the hood that needs to be addressed. What we say comes out of what's going on inside of us. And again, in that sense, he's just echoing the words of Jesus. In Luke, Jesus said this. He said, good people bring good things out of the good stored up in their heart. And evil people bring evil things out of the evil stored up in their heart. Now watch out for this. For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. right? And in that sense, that's how our words can be like warning signs. When something comes out, it just seems anger, seems whatever, that can be a sign for us that there's something going on internally that needs to be addressed. And I hate it, but that's true. That has been true for my life, at least. My guess is it's probably true in your lives as well. I remember an instance, years ago, a coworker came in, and there was a part of a project we were working on together that they were supposed to have done, and they just didn't quite get it done. And I just blew up. I mean, I just kind of jumped down their throat. And normally, that's not how I respond in situations like that. And you kind of see it wash over the other person, and they leave the office. And a few minutes later, I cooled down, and I just thought, what's going on here? I mean, what is going on that kind of made me say that pushed me to respond that way? And I just kind of started reflecting on where I was that day, and I realized, oh yeah, this is going on at home. Here's this tension. Here's this frustration that's going on. All those things have been kind of churning around inside of me, and this poor person was just the unfortunate recipient of it when that all kind of flowed over. So I went and found him and apologized, but it was one of those instances where my words gave a very unflattering but very accurate picture of what was actually going on in my heart. And that's the idea that James is driving at here, right? Our words reveal our character. They reveal our thoughts. They reveal our attitudes. And in that sense, they're like warning signs. And when we understand that the words are just a reflection of this inner stuff, that helps us understand why it's so hard to change the behavior, to really get control of our tongue. Because oftentimes, if there's a behavior that we want to change, we try to deal with it just at the level of the behavior, right? I'm not going to swear anymore. I'm not going to be angry anymore. I'm not going to gossip anymore. I'm not going to say this anymore. And we work on just the behavior itself and don't pay any attention to where those behaviors are really coming from, what they're growing out of. And when that happens, it's almost like you've got like this pressure cooker, right? And this pot is boiling. And when we're just focusing on the behavior, it's like we're doing everything we can to keep that lid on and keep it down. And for a while, we do well and we don't say that. But the stuff on the inside is still churning and bubbling up. And sooner or later, it just explodes. And it comes out. And it really makes a mess. And other people get the brunt of that. But that's the thing, right? If we really want to find a way to control our tongues, I think part of what James is driving at is we've got to figure out a way to address what's going on the inside. And this, I think, is really where he can be helpful to us. Because once we understand that our words are warning signs, right? If you say something that's got some anger or some insecurity or whatever it is that's behind it, then what we can do is say, okay, God, what is it pointing out on the inside? Where am I scared? Where am I insecure? Where am I frustrated? Where am I angry? And then you've got sort of a real clear problem area that you can then invite God in his love and his grace and his power to come in and to begin to do that work of changing, to begin to sort of apply his grace and his love and his power to that instance, to see some renovation happen in your heart and in your life. And to do that, though, I think we do need to be aware of the fact that when we invite God into change, sometimes we've got to make some really practical, visible changes in order to create some space for him to work. Like for example, in my life in this area, one of the changes that I've had to be really careful of is just, changing who I'm around. Because again, James' goal in this letter is to draw out the best in people, but we probably all know some people who just call out the worst in us, right? I mentioned in that video, or Ike mentioned in that video, kind of using humor, using really cutting, sarcastic humor as a way to make yourself feel better. That was my MO for years and years and years. And I'm just so grateful that I'm with my wife, Martha, today, because one of the girls I dated before her, she really liked that. She thought that was really funny, and I would sort of take people out at the knees with the comments I made. So she egged that kind of behavior on. And she really encouraged me to keep doing that. She's kind of calling out this worst part of me. And when I met Martha and started dating her, she didn't really see it that way. She said, hey, I understand what you're doing. I understand you're trying to be funny. But do you understand that there's life and death in the power of the tongue? And you might want to think about that differently. You might not want to be a kind of person who's just sort of sending out these words that end up hurting people. So to make that change, to create some space for God to do that work in you, you may have to change the kind of people that you're around. Or you may need to change the kind of things that you allow to sort of have input into you. Right? Maybe you do need to spend more time reading the Bible, praying, connecting with other people who are trying to follow Jesus. Right? That's really why, as a church, we encourage you to pray and read your Bible and do those kinds of things. It's not because we think God has this checklist, and if we can just check enough things off, God's going to be like, okay, you got a B+ today. That's enough to get you in. No, we pray and we read the Bible because that's a way to connect with the life-giving power of God. It's a way to open up space in our life for his love, his power, his presence to get inside us. And that's what does the work of changing us in ways that we don't often fully understand. So that's why we encourage you to read and to pray and to do those kinds of things. So maybe there are changes that you need to make to allow more of him in, to create some more space for him to work. Or honestly, maybe you're here today and the change that you need to make is a much more drastic one, a more life-changing one. Maybe you have never made a decision to accept Jesus as the Lord and leader of your life, to really accept the offer of love and grace and forgiveness that he gives to all of us. I mean, for you, as you've been sort of reading through this passage in James, maybe you get to that line where he says, no one can tame the tongue, and you're like, yeah, I know that to be true, because I have tried and tried and tried, and I'm just beating my head against the wall. I've tried to get control of my tongue on my own, and it's just not happening. Or maybe it's another area for you, right? I've tried to get a handle on that addiction, and I just don't seem to be getting any traction there. I've tried to change sort of the way that I relate to other people, and it's just not working. Maybe today is the day to realize that you're just not going to be able to do it on your own. And that's okay, because none of us can, and none of us have to. Right? Jesus came so that we could have life and have it to the full. We can't pull that off on our own, but because of his grace, he offers us a way to do that. By accepting the forgiveness he offers, by putting our trust and faith in him, we believe that his power then becomes a part of us and helps us change differently and live the lives we were created to live. So if that's a step that you need to take today, or if that's a conversation that you want to hear more about, would really encourage you to do that. In just a couple of moments, as Randy mentioned, we're going to take communion together. And during that time of reflection, it could be a great time to do that. We'll put some words up on the screen that can help you sort of think through that. Or we've got John Bartlow over against the wall there. I know he would be happy to talk with you and pray with you and just answer any questions you might have about that. But here's where I kind of want to land the plane today. If you're here this morning and you read this like, yeah, no one can tame the tongue, I know that's true. I really hope that you don't leave today discouraged by thinking, boy, this is an impossible task. Because that's not the goal of James' letter. He's not trying to discourage people. He's trying to encourage people. He is trying to call out the best in them. And James is absolutely convinced that, yeah, we cannot do this on our own. But he's okay with that, because he's also absolutely convinced that God's power, alive and work in us, can make these changes possible. Right? Really getting some traction in these areas. It is not about doing more. It's about letting God do more in us. So would really encourage you to think about those things as we prepare to take communion. Here's how we're going to do that. In just a moment, I'm going to pray, and then the musicians are going to sort of magically appear behind me, and we'll just have some music going, and we're going to just kind of let the music play for a minute or so to give you all just some time to stop and reflect. If you've been sort of tracking along in those sermon notes, there's some questions on the back of that page that you can use to guide your reflection during this time or for kind of further study and thought during the week. But would